we would probably have an improved electrical grid system, hopefully the infrastructure for electrical vehicles, and improved energy storage techniques. If we are buying those products, if there's a financial incentive to do research on them, think about the iPod or your computer. Every year they come up with a better one because they can put money in their pocket. Well, if those in power can get money in their pocket, they're going to start innovating along clean energy lines. And the more energy efficient that you live personally or your business works, the more financial reward you would have. And so it's an incentive to purchase solar panels, wind turbines, insulate your home, either electric or hybrid cars. And the more we buy, the more manufacturers kind of gear up for it, and the lower the price comes. So it's a whole market shift. And we're basically changing the rule of the man-made market to work to our advantage. Now, Citizens Climate Lobby is nonpartisan, and we don't advocate for even any particular energy source. What we say is get that steadily increasing fee on fossil fuels, and then allow non-carbon forms of energy to compete fairly on the market. And whatever combination of energy that wins out in your particular area, that's fine. And we're doing it without subsidies, and we're doing it without regulations. So this is a very conservative idea. So that's the fee portion of carbon fee and dividend. But let's get to that dividend part. What does that mean? Well, what that means is rather than the government keeping those revenues that would be generated, 100% of them would be returned to American households. And we suggest in a form of monthly dividend, okay? Each adult in a family, regardless of whether you're in the Koch family or the Del Bono Meyer family, would get an equal piece of that pie. And each child up to 2 will get a half a share. And this does 3 things. And I'm going to go through each of those. It protects low and middle income families during the transition to non-fossil fuels. Importantly, it appeals to both sides of the aisle politically. And it spurs the economy because people have more money in their pocket. So let's talk about protecting low and middle income families first. We know if we put a fee on fossil fuel producers, they're going to pass that fee on to the consumers. There's no way they won't, right? So it's going to cost more money to fill your gas tank up. It's going to cost more money to heat your home and to light your home. And importantly, studies have shown that 2/3 of American households will get a larger dividend check than those cost increases that would occur. So for an average family of 4, this check would be about after 10 years, would be about $300 a month. For a family of 4 in 20 years, we're talking $400 per month. So that helps to offset those increasing costs as we move to as we transition. The second point is that it appeals to both sides of the aisle. You know, this is great, a great proposal, but we got to get passed. We need both sides of the aisle to buy into this. And we are so fortunate that we have George Shultz, who sits on our advisory board. He was the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury under the Reagan administration. And he makes the point that this is not a tax if the government doesn't keep the money. That's part of the reason why we prefer to use the word fee. And there are other conservative economists who agree. Greg Menke was an advisor to George W. Bush and Mitt Romney. Hank Paulson was the Secretary of Treasury under the Bush administration. And here's a whole list of conservative economists who agree with putting a fee on carbon, and in particular a revenue fee on putting on carbon. Now, one of the big issues that we often hear when we suggest putting a fee on carbon is, what would it do to the economy? What would it do to the economy? We've been told that what's good for the environment is bad for the economy. But that's just not true. CCL really wanted to get an answer to this. So we hired a nonpartisan software modeling company called Regional Economic Models. You can see some of their other clients up here. They have a sophisticated computer algorithm in which you can hold all the parameters the same and put in one policy and see how things change. So we hired them to do that with our policy, and they did that. And what the study showed is that it would create jobs. 2.1 million after 10 years, 2.8 million in 20 years. That's about a 1% increase over base. So it's not solving all of the world's problems, but it's not hurting either. And interestingly enough, it's entry-level jobs. These are jobs that people who are out of work need to have. They're good-paying jobs. And as you might expect, a good portion of them would be in the clean energy sector, but that's not all. And this is that third point to why the dividend is so important. People will have more real disposable income. That's a fancy word to say they have more money in their pocket that they can spend. And if you have more money in your pocket that you can spend, especially in an aging population, you get your health taken care of, you go shopping, you go out to eat, and you fix your home. So you see job increases in all of those. So that's why that third point of the benefit from the monthly dividend is there. It spurs the economy. Okay, but we're not doing this really as an economic thing. We're doing this because we're worried about greenhouse gases. And, oh, this was just to tell you that the GDP also goes up, I'm sorry. So what happens to greenhouse gas emissions? What the study shows is that in 10 years, you get a 33% reduction in emissions. In 20 years, a 52% reduction in emissions. Now let's just take a look at that. The blue line there is our baseline. We're kind of evening off in terms of greenhouse emissions. The red line is what the EPA regulations would do. It does decrease emissions somewhat. But look what happens with carbon fee and dividend. It is really powerful. And we need something really powerful now. In addition, in about 10 years, you could expect most coal-powered plants to be phased out. And that actually saves lives. 13,000 in a year, 227 in 20 years. So this is where Citizens Climate Lobby comes in, and we'll see if we can hear this.
The climate is
it?
changing. Extreme weather is disrupting livelihoods and food supplies around the world. This is observed. This is documented. This is the scientific community's consensus. The climate is changing. Carbon emissions are driving that change. Emissions come from burning fossil fuels. So if we want to slow or even reverse the change, we must lower our fossil fuel use. By charging a fee on fossil fuels and returning that revenue to households as a dividend, we can do just that, starting a chain of positive effects. Fossil fuels become less desirable. Cleaner sources of energy become more competitive. The dividend creates millions of jobs. Carbon emissions go down, reduced air pollution saves tens of thousands of lives, and climate change is brought under control. We can make this happen, but enacting a carbon fee and dividend isn't in our hands, it's in theirs. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. Our government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want. And what we want is a livable world. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby works for. To empower citizens to connect with and influence their members of Congress. To spread the idea that each one of us can address climate change. Bring your voice to citizensclimatelobby.org.
So that's my whole talk right there, practically, in about 2 minutes. What Citizens Climate Lobby does is it works to create that political will. And again, we're nonpartisan. And, you know, this is the point in which people say, you know, our democracy is broken. And we're having, you know, what is the chance that we're going to get Congress to work in a bipartisan way to move ahead? And this is where I argue, and so do other people higher than I in CCL, that we have to put our cynicism away. We have to be that change we want to see. And how we do that is much like how you guys do it in the League of Women Voters. We educate our volunteers about the issue, and then we develop ongoing, respectful, and respectful is a key, and ongoing is a key, relationships with our members of Congress. And we're focused on carbon fee and dividend. Now, our goal is to have a CCL chapter in every voting district, and we have about 80% of districts covered. Even if we don't have a chapter in one of the districts, we do have a volunteer who's designated as a liaison to each member of Congress. And they get to know that member of Congress, and they help the chapter know the member of Congress so that they know their views regarding climate change, the legislation that they've worked on, especially legislation that we can authentically thank them for, what their family situation is, what their faith interests are, and what do we have in common with them. And then we meet with them. We try to meet with them as many times as we can in district. And then every year, and this is what Elizabeth was talking about, we do this incredibly empowering and inspiring activity. And if you get a chance, come join us, do this with us. We get together, and over a 3-day period, last year we had 600 volunteers, we meet with almost every member of Congress. And we do it in a respectful way. And I think it gets noticed. This year we're hoping for 1,000 volunteers. Last year we had over 1,000 lobby meetings. That's more than any other environmental group. So we meet with people. Now, what do the Democrats think? Well, the Democrats are pretty on board. Many of them have introduced legislation. It's becoming more and more similar to what we're suggesting. There's two big things we need to work on with Democrats. We need to help them with their cynicism, because many of them are frustrated. But two, we also have to encourage them to keep it revenue neutral. Encourage that monthly dividend. There's a temptation to put subsidies, understandably, towards clean energy technology. But it's not likely to get passed on a bipartisan level if that happens. Now, in terms of the Republicans and what people are believing right now, this poll came out in January 2015. The majority of American public, and nearly half of Republicans, support government action to curb global warming. And if you look at the young voters coming up among the Republican Party, the rising American electorate is what it's called, in a ratio of about 4-to-1, they support action on global warming. So it's going to be important that Republicans, who have actually painted themselves into a really difficult corner, take action on this. This is Bob Inglis, and he tried to do that, and he was out. It's hard to do that, and we try to go in understanding it is hard for them to do that. But we think that the tide is turning. We know that Keystone XL got passed about a week or so ago, but in it there was a set of resolutions that were called the Sense of the Senate. And the first amendment was introduced by Sheldon Whitehouse, and he asked to vote yes or no, is climate change real or a hoax? And get this, every senator voted yes, except for one. That's the Republicans too. Now, when the second resolution came, which was, does human activity significantly contribute to it? Well, we didn't do as well. 50 voted yes, but there were 5 Republicans who voted yes. And when you take that word significantly out, we got 15 more Republicans who voted yes. And here they are. Those with the stars are the ones who voted yes for significantly. So these are a core of people that we can work with. And our goal is to encourage Republicans to introduce carbon fee and dividend in 2015. It is scary. It puts them in a difficult position. But if we can create a situation where they can safely come together as a group and support such legislation, and I'm talking about a market-based approach, one that creates jobs and one that doesn't grow the government, I think that there's a chance, and we hope to do it this year. I'd like to end with a quote from Mary Van Valen, who's one of our volunteers. And this is what she said after she came back from DC in June. It was printed in the Record Eagle. Spending time recently in Washington, DC, lobbying for climate change legislation, transformed her thinking. Rather than giving up on the federal government, she realized she was a part of this thing called democracy. See, and I think you guys get this. CCL begins with gratitude and respectful dialogue, but disagreeing never means the end of the conversation. Cynicism and indifference will never get the work of democracy done. Together, we can create a livable future. So time is running out. We need all hands on deck. And I'd like to encourage you to do a few different things. There is a sheet that either has gone around or is going around that would actually put you on our CCL newsletter. Every month, you will have specific actions about what to do. We have a local chapter here in Northern Michigan. Our next meeting is this coming Monday, up above MLUI, starts at 5 o'clock in Traverse City. Maybe you guys want to start a local chapter up here. Stay and write postcards to your members of Congress. You have the postcards here, and they have talking points. So if you have the time, write them. And then that beautiful bowl that Pete made, you can plop them right in there, and we'll mail them for you. Lastly, I have my cards up here. Take a card of mine if you would. And if you have another group you think might be interested in a similar presentation, so more and more people can understand this, please take my card, contact me, let's get out there. There are others of us who could do similar presentations, but we need to get the word out. And then identify and help us connect with people who will support our legislation. At some point, we hope to put together a letter that we can actually present to Representative Benishek and have them see how many people support this idea. Okay. Elizabeth, Kelly, and Pete, you want to come up? And we'll see if we can answer some questions. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I saw a question somewhere in here.
Do you find that the Congress people who do not believe in climate change, or at least they say they do not believe in climate change, do you get a sense in talking with them and lobbying with them that they, honest to goodness, do not believe, or do you think that they are beholden to people who are supporting their campaigns?
I think each of us have an opinion on that. Does anybody want to start?
I would say that most of them probably do believe, and that's not something that I can say from conversations with them so much as things that staffers have said, and the fact that over the years with our lobbying, we have been getting higher level meetings with higher level staff, I should say, and more face-to-face meetings. So I think that there's definitely, this understanding that something has to happen and that they need to figure out a way to save face and do something about the problem.
How is the program administered? Who collects the fee? Who counts the heads, writes the checks?
Yeah, I actually have, a slide all ready for that question because I always get that question. We think it's fairly easy to administer, and it's what the department. It's the same people who does the income tax. It's the Department of Treasury who does it. Okay, I always get confused exactly who does it. And these estimates are based on the 2008 Economic Stimulus Act. They think that that's probably a pretty useful proxy for administering the cost of fee of dividends legislation. So it's thought that at 2015 you'd get about $79 billion of revenue, $130 in 2016. And basically, there's 3 scenarios. If everybody actually gets a check in the mail, it's more expensive than if they get a direct deposit. And you can see that it would start out at 2015 being a higher percentage of the total revenues collected. But over time, that percentage would go down. So if everybody got a direct deposit, basically piggybacking it on the SNAP and the SSA program, it really wouldn't be very expensive to administer. That's the estimated cost.
This would all be done by the Treasury, you say?
Mhm.
I have 2 questions. One is, I'm inferring that you are projecting that this would take the place of any carbon trading scheme.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, what is the position of groups such as the NRDC or Sierra Club on this particular proposal?
Do you have an answer to that?
They aren't, what I hear a lot of different other environmental organizations, and actually that's going to be our national discussion that we'll be having on our national call this Saturday. There'll be somebody from the National U.S. Climate Action Network, and she'll be talking about what other groups are doing. Sierra Club has been incredible in their work to fight new coal-fired power plants, for example. So they've been focusing more on regulations. But what I do hear is many organizations talking about how we have to put a price on carbon. That's how it's often said. So they're not specifically advocating for carbon fee and dividend, but it's a very generally accepted among environmental groups that we need to put a price on carbon.
I think there are a lot of environmental groups that have their individual focus, but this really gets at the root of all of the different issues. You know, if we can put a price on carbon emissions and reduce that, it takes care of so many other.
Yeah, I think what Pete is speaking to, you know, it addresses our concerns about fracking. It addresses our concerns about coal-powered plants. It addresses our concerns about oil going through the straits because it's not going to be lucrative to continue to do it. And so it'll get phased out.
I'm just not sure how you see it as not regulation.
It's more market-based rather than regulation.
It's putting a fee on the fossil fuels when they're removed from the ground. So it's not telling anybody you have to change how clean your coal plant is, or
That you
it's
have to
just
meet these standards or whatever. It's
Right.
just, how much are you pulling out? Here's your bill.
And
You
it
know?
works towards leveling the playing field, so those other sources, you know, are not competing with all of the other subsidies.
I'm just not sure that
Yeah,
many people in Congress are going to see it any differently than, you know, the same as regulations.
Regulations have an issue too. It becomes very costly to have a regulation in place and then go out and make sure that, you know, the enforcement is difficult and very costly.
And part of the reason why we do it as far upstream as possible is it makes, it's about 3,000 points at which you'd have to test. If you went further downstream, you know, there's a lot other places where you'd be administering the costs, and there'd be a lot more of a chance for a shell game. But if you go as far, this is one of the reasons, if you go as far upstream as possible, it really keeps it fairly simple to apply the fee.
And back to the regulations, and conservatives generally are very opposed to government regulations. It's interfering in the free market. This is a way, a very well-accepted way among economists to address a problem with the external costs of a product. And so it is a free market approach. And that's why we believe it's important to use this method, because it can appeal to a broader, to both sides of the aisle, as Lisa said earlier, which is really crucial. We have to get buy-in from conservatives if we're going to get some quick action.
this all sounds very wonderful, but we all know that it's a global problem. So what about European countries, China? Can we?
And you guys chime in as you want, but you know, I anticipated the question because it's really important. And basically, our legislation suggests that there's a border tariff that's placed on all goods. And let me see if I can explain this in a little bit more detail. A tariff is placed on all imported goods equivalent to the cost of manufacturing a like good in another country that doesn't have a carbon tax. So if you're importing steel from a country that does not have a carbon tax, we could place a tariff on it. Also, we can rebate to our manufacturers equivalent amount if they were exporting. So again, imported goods, no border tax adjustment, we place the tariff. It gets kind of complicated. It's border tariffs. The rationale is that it creates an incentive for other nations to pass similar legislations. If they don't have similar legislation in place, say you're China, and you want to export a lot of goods to us, then they're going to be hit hard with border tariffs. But they can choose to put a similar tariff in and keep the revenue for themselves. But we are actually a little bit behind. There are many, many countries that have a carbon tax, and other countries that have emission trading schemes. And if you look at this, China is listed. And they started in 2014 a pilot project, essentially, to do an emissions trading scheme. And it's thought by 2018 their whole country will be involved. So they say this is from the World Bank, okay? This is information from the World Bank, that of the world's 10 largest economies, and California is counted as the 10th, US and Russia are the only two that don't have carbon pricing.
Well, that's wrong, because Australia did away with its carbon pricing.
What year?
Last year.
And you're right about that. They did. It was effective. There was a decrease in emissions. But what was interesting was that it was not 100% revenue neutral. And because of that, we think that that was part of the reason. They didn't have a monthly dividend scheme. It didn't stimulate their economy like ours would, and it was further downstream. In addition to that, and this is where I get a little confused, I don't know if you can help at all. I think that there's ideas that Australia may in fact reinstate it somewhere down the road. So I don't think it's.
Yeah, they didn't remove it completely. I think they just suspended it.
Or they put it to zero is what I heard.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, which is essentially, so that's all semantics.
Last fall, if you attended the IPR forum in Glen Arbor, and it was Ray France, when asked about climate change, he vehemently said it was a hoax and that God will take care of us. Now, when you come up to that kind of statement, I can think, well, Noah waited and look what a mess that was. But have you had that come up, and what has been your response?
I don't think we hear that a whole lot, that blatantly. And, you know, we're not going to convince everybody, but we don't have to convince all of our members of Congress. We have to convince enough to pass this legislation. And in some cases, it's more a matter of, you know, removing the resistance. I mean, there's different kinds of levels of buy-in. You know, we want people voting for it, but it's also people who just won't throw up roadblocks to help us keep moving it down the path. So.
It's hard. This is actually a really neat thing that comes from skeptical science that basically shows, let's see if I can start it again. Oh, here it goes. You know, how you can take 2 points and show that the temperature is going down.
Cherry picking.
Yeah, but that if you watch it over time, it goes up. So that's just a neat little graph from
And there
skeptical
have
science.
been a lot of articles recently. I mean, there's this polling that Lisa showed you a little bit about, but also some news articles about conservatives who are becoming more aware that they need to address this issue for 2016. They need to have a better way of approaching the problem and talking about it and come up with some solutions. And we think that we can be part of that solution. And there's one other thing I'd just like to touch on. We talked about carbon pricing, carbon fee and dividend, revenue neutral carbon pricing. Basically, ours is a variation of a revenue neutral carbon tax, which is what they have in British Columbia.